No one expected Sarah Ferguson to speak again. Not after everything she had already survived. Not after decades of watching her words twisted, headlines rewritten, and private moments turned into ammunition. She was the one who learned, the hard way, that silence can be safer than truth. That in the royal world, memories aren't just buried, they're burned. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. So why now? Why this story? Why Meghan Markle? And why Prince Andrew? Those are the questions no one can answer yet. But what Sarah revealed didn't come from anger, revenge, or jealousy, at least not the kind people like to assume. It came from something far more dangerous. It came from finally being tired of protecting people who never protected her. Let's start with a moment so small, so ordinary, that no one paid attention. A quiet conversation that slipped under the palace radar. A detail forgotten by everyone, except Sarah. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with alarms and explosions. Sometimes it arrives with a whisper. And this whisper would eventually lead to a revelation nobody was prepared for. You're probably wondering something right now. How could two people from completely different worlds, Meghan Markle, the newest royal tornado, and Prince Andrew, the most controversial figure in the monarchy, ever end up in the same sentence, let alone the same room? Better yet, why was Sarah Ferguson the first person to notice? Let's rewind. Not years, just moments. The kind of moments people overlook because nothing seems wrong, not at first. But Sarah always paid attention to what others missed. After all, she learned early that danger in the royal family never announces itself. It smiles. It charms. It pretends everything is fine, right up until the moment it's not. And Meghan? Meghan entered the monarchy like a lightning strike. Brilliant. Uncontrolled. Impossible to ignore. Some people loved her for it. Others feared her for it. Sarah didn't do either, not at first. Because unlike the world watching from the outside, Sarah recognized something familiar in Meghan's eyes. A survivor's stare. Someone who knew how to walk into a room and immediately study it. Someone who understood power the way an outsider does. Not as a privilege, but as a weapon. But here's the part no one talks about. When Meghan first arrived, she didn't avoid Andrew. She gravitated toward him. Not because of attraction, not because of admiration, but because of something far more calculated and far more unsettling. Access. You see, in the royal family, relationships aren't emotional first. They're strategic. Who opens doors? Who closes them? Who can protect you? And who can destroy you? Meghan understood that instantly. Andrew did too. But what neither of them expected was that someone else was watching their connection take shape, slowly, quietly. Long before anyone else noticed. Her name was Sarah Ferguson, the woman who knew Andrew better than anyone alive. The woman who could read him before he spoke. The woman who could sense, with painful accuracy, when something wasn't right. And from the very beginning, something about the way Meghan and Andrew interacted wasn't right. Not dramatic. Not scandalous. Just wrong enough to make Sarah stop and think. Have you ever had that moment? When you notice something other people don't? You can't explain it. You can't prove it. But you feel it in your bones. That was Sarah. It began gently. A shared laugh that lasted a little too long. A private exchange during a public moment. A conversation that continued after everyone else walked away. Nothing concrete. Nothing that could be repeated. Just energy. And energy is dangerous when no one understands it. But here's the twist that shocks people the most. At first, Sarah didn't feel threatened. She felt confused. Because Meghan was supposed to be bonding with Catherine, or with Queen Elizabeth, or with anyone who made sense. But instead, she kept showing up near Andrew. Not constantly, not obsessively, just enough. Enough to make Sarah pay attention. Enough to make Andrew behave differently. Enough to form a pattern no one else saw. Not yet. This wasn't the kind of thing that becomes a headline overnight. It was the kind of thing that slowly, silently grows roots underground. Until one day, the ground gives way. And that's exactly what happened. But before we get there, you need to understand the one rule of royal life Sarah learned long before Meghan ever entered the picture. Nothing is accidental. Not in that world. Not in that family. Everything has meaning. Every glance. Every silence. Every decision. So when Meghan began requesting private time with Andrew, even brief conversations, even casual drop-ins, Sarah didn't panic. She observed. She didn't ask questions. She waited. Because waiting reveals more than confronting ever does. And what she discovered next would begin the unraveling of a secret that stayed hidden for years. But let's pause here for a second, because you might be asking yourself, why would Meghan even be interested in Andrew at all? Why him? Why not anyone else? Think about it. Andrew was the one member of the royal family with access, but without authority. Influence without visibility. Doors without oversight. In other words, the perfect back channel. For someone who wanted to learn the system quickly. For someone who needed information without leaving fingerprints. And Meghan was someone who understood that the fastest way to survive in unfamiliar territory is to find the person who knows where the exits are and where the bodies are buried. Andrew was that person. But here's where things become even stranger. Andrew didn't resist. He welcomed it. Not in a dramatic or inappropriate way, at least not at first, but with a kind of eagerness that unsettled Sarah immediately. Because Sarah had seen this before. Not with Meghan, with other people. People who needed something from Andrew. People who got close to him for reasons that never ended well. People who left a trail of damage behind them. So when Sarah noticed Meghan leaning in, strategically, carefully, she didn't judge Meghan. She feared what Andrew would do. Because Andrew was always vulnerable to one thing. Attention. Especially from people who didn't treat him like a problem. Or an embarrassment. Or a warning. Meghan treated him like he mattered. And that was all it took. Now here's the chilling part. What Sarah noticed first wasn't what Meghan did. It was what Andrew stopped doing. He became more secretive. He changed his patterns. He began showing up in unexpected places, always with the same excuse. Just passing through. Just checking in. Just coincidence. But Sarah didn't believe in royal coincidence. Not anymore. So she stayed quiet. She stayed patient. She stayed observant. Until one night. One very ordinary night. Something happened that forced her to confront a possibility she never imagined. A moment so subtle you could miss it if you blinked. But Sarah didn't blink. Because the truth has a way of showing itself when the right person is watching. And she was watching. But before we get to that moment, there's something else you need to understand. Something that explains why this story matters now. For years, the royal family operated like a sealed vault. Secrets went in. Nothing came out. But then everything changed. Not because of Meghan. Not because of Andrew. But because the monarchy began losing the one thing it depended on for survival. Control. Public control. Media control. Narrative control. And when control disappears, stories that once stayed buried begin to rise. That's why Sarah finally stepped forward. Not to attack. Not to expose. But because silence was no longer protection, it was participation. And she refused to participate anymore. So when she revealed what she knew, the world wasn't prepared. Not because her information was explosive, but because no one expected her to be the one holding it. You see, people love to underestimate Sarah Ferguson. They forget she lived through scandals before Meghan was even born. They forget she survived public humiliation long before social media existed. They forget she watched the royal family destroy reputations from the inside, including her own. So when Sarah finally opened her mouth, people listened. Even the palace. Even the press. Even the ones who pretended not to care. Because if Sarah knew something, truly knew something, then it meant one terrifying possibility. This wasn't gossip. It was history. And history has consequences. So let me leave you with this. Before Sarah spoke, only 3 people knew the full truth about what happened between Meghan and Andrew. One of them was Meghan. One of them was Andrew. And the third? That's the part no one was ready for. Because the person who knew the truth was someone who should have never been involved at all. And what they saw would change everything. Forever.it didn't begin with a scandal. It didn't begin with a headline, a leaked message, or a dramatic confrontation. It began with something much smaller. A moment so ordinary that anyone else would have ignored it. But Sarah Ferguson was not anyone else. She was the one person in the royal world who understood that danger never walks through the front door. It slips in through a crack. It starts as nothing. It pretends to be harmless. And that's exactly how this began. The day Sarah realized something was wrong didn't look suspicious at all. It was a calm afternoon at Royal Lodge. The kind of quiet that makes you believe the world is stable, predictable, and safe. Birds in the garden. Light through the windows. Staff moving like background noise. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Until Meghan Markle walked in. Now, Meghan arriving at Royal Lodge wasn't shocking by itself. She and Harry were still adjusting to royal life, still visiting different family properties, still being introduced to traditions, routines, and faces that came with the Windsor territory. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't Meghan's presence. It was her timing. Meghan arrived early. Too early. Before Harry. Before anyone expected her. And if there's one thing Sarah learned from decades inside the monarchy, it's this. No one arrives early without a reason. Especially not Meghan Markle. Have you ever been in a room where something feels off, but you can't explain why? Where everyone is smiling, everyone is polite, and yet something in the air makes your brain whisper. Pay attention. That was Sarah. Meghan entered the room with that polished ease she mastered long before becoming a duchess. The confidence of someone who knows exactly how she'll be perceived and uses it as armor. Most people were charmed instantly. Sarah wasn't. Not because she disliked Meghan. She didn't. Not because she was jealous. She wasn't. But because Sarah never trusted first impressions, she trusted patterns. And Meghan was already breaking one. Because Meghan wasn't looking around the room for Harry. She wasn't looking for Catherine. She wasn't looking for anyone who made sense. Her eyes went straight to one person. Prince Andrew. It happened fast. A split second. A moment so brief that you could blink and miss it. But Sarah didn't blink. Meghan smiled. Not the broad, camera-ready smile she used in public, but a smaller one. Controlled. Intentional. Familiar in a way Sarah couldn't place yet. Andrew smiled back. Not casually. Not politely. But with recognition. Like this wasn't the first time. That was the moment something inside Sarah shifted. Not panic. Not fear. Just awareness. You know that feeling? When your instincts tap you on the shoulder and say, that wasn't normal. But nobody else reacted. Nobody else noticed. Everyone continued talking, laughing, settling into the afternoon as if nothing meaningful had just occurred. And maybe nothing had. Maybe Sarah was imagining it. Maybe she was seeing something that wasn't there. Except Sarah didn't hallucinate patterns. She recognized them. Because she had seen this before. Not with Meghan, but with other people who entered the royal circle with one goal. Get close to someone who could open doors. And Andrew, whether people liked it or not, still controlled doors. More than he should have. Now, here's where the story gets even stranger. Meghan didn't sit near Sarah. She didn't sit with the women. She didn't sit in the obvious, socially safe place. She sat near Andrew. Not directly beside him. That would have been too obvious, but close enough that conversation didn't need to be invited. It was already there. Sarah watched. She didn't speak. She didn't react. She simply observed the smallest changes, the ones that reveal the biggest truths. Andrew sat differently, straighter, more alert, more alive, as if Meghan's presence wasn't casual background noise. It was fuel. That bothered Sarah more than anything. Because Andrew was not supposed to be reacting like that. Not after everything. Not after years of carefully managed appearances, reduced engagements, and strict boundaries. Sarah knew his tells. This was one. She didn't know what it meant yet. But it meant something. Then something else happened. Something even smaller. Meghan leaned in to say something quietly, just a sentence. Too soft for anyone else to hear. But Sarah didn't need the words. She watched Andrew's reaction. He froze for half a second, then laughed. Not a big laugh. Not a polite one. A quiet laugh. The kind you only give when someone says something personal. Too personal. Again, anyone else would have ignored it. But Sarah wasn't anyone else. Have you ever been in a situation where everyone else is relaxed, and you're the only one who feels the shift? That was her. She felt the temperature in the room change. Just a fraction, but enough. The kind of change that tells you, this is not random. This is not accidental. This is intentional. Still, Sarah didn't jump to conclusions. She didn't judge Meghan. She didn't defend Andrew. She simply watched the rest of the afternoon unfold. And waited for the moment that would confirm whether this was nothing, or the beginning of something. The gathering continued as normal. Conversations blended. Drinks were poured. People moved around the room. But one thing didn't change. Meghan and Andrew kept finding each other. Not obviously. Not dramatically. Just enough. A shared comment across the room. A second too long of eye contact. A moment when Meghan walked past him, slowly, as if she was waiting for acknowledgement. And Andrew always gave it. Always. That was when Sarah knew this wasn't in her imagination. This was a pattern. But the moment that sealed it happened at the end of the afternoon, when people were leaving, coats being collected, goodbyes being exchanged. Meghan stepped aside from the group, as if taking a call, or adjusting something in her bag, or waiting for Harry. But she wasn't waiting. Andrew approached her. No one else noticed. No one else was looking. But Sarah was. The two exchanged a few quiet words. Meghan smiled again, that same controlled, intentional smile from earlier. Andrew nodded. Then Meghan touched his arm. Just briefly, just lightly, just enough to say, "This isn't our first conversation." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't suspicion. It was recognition. Because Sarah had lived long enough inside that world to know that inappropriate relationships don't start with grand gestures. They start with tiny ones. Ones people dismiss. Ones people laugh off. Ones people only notice once it's too late. And here's the part almost no one understands. Sarah didn't think Meghan was attracted to Andrew. That wasn't the energy. This wasn't romantic. It was strategic. Meghan wasn't flirting. She was studying, calculating, positioning. And Andrew wasn't leading. He was following. That terrified Sarah more than anything. Because Andrew following someone else's lead never ended well. Ever. As the day ended, Harry finally arrived. Cheerful, unaware, completely disconnected from whatever had just happened. Meghan shifted instantly back into wife mode. Smiling, effortlessly affectionate, seamlessly innocent, like nothing unusual had happened. But Sarah couldn't forget what she saw. Not because she understood it, but because she didn't. And the unknown is always more dangerous than the truth. That night, after everyone left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet of Royal Lodge and replayed every moment. Not obsessively, not emotionally, just analytically. The timing, the glances, the private moment at the end, the arm touch, the early arrival, the too easy familiarity. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they meant everything. And then came the part that bothered her the most. Andrew didn't bring it up. Not once. He didn't mention Meghan. He didn't mention the visit. He didn't mention the conversation. Silence. And silence, from Andrew, was not normal. That was when Sarah knew, truly knew, that something was happening beneath the surface. She didn't know what. Not yet. But she knew this. Something had started. And whatever it wasn't going to stay hidden forever. But what Sarah didn't know that night, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was that the small moment she noticed was only the beginning. Because the very next morning, something happened that didn't just confirm her instincts. It shook her. It forced her to confront a truth she wasn't ready to accept. A truth that would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It started 3 days later. Not 3 weeks. Not 3 months. 3 days. Because in the royal world, things don't unfold slowly the way the public imagines. Secrets don't simmer over time. They move fast. They leap. They take shape before anyone even realizes something has begun. And that's exactly what happened. It was a quiet morning at Royal Lodge, the kind that comes before the palace becomes a storm. The kind where nothing feels unusual, and yet, something in the air feels different without explaining why. Sarah was in the drawing room reviewing schedules, the usual stack of papers, the endless calendar of unspoken expectations. Staff passed through like shadows. The house breathed the same familiar rhythm. Then she heard footsteps. Not rushed, not hesitant, just unexpected. Sarah looked up and froze. Meghan Markle was standing in the doorway. Again, but this time, she wasn't early by accident. She was early on purpose. There was no event scheduled, no family gathering, no reason for her to be there at all, except one. And it became immediately obvious Meghan wasn't surprised to see Sarah. She was surprised Sarah wasn't somewhere else. "Is Andrew here?" Meghan asked. Calm. Casual. Too casual. Sarah kept her expression still, the way decades inside the monarchy trained her to do. "No," she replied. "He's not in at the moment." Meghan nodded, unfazed. She didn't ask when he would return. She didn't pretend she had come for another reason. She simply stepped inside the room as if she belonged there. As if this visit was routine. As if she had done it before. Sarah sat quietly, watching every detail. Meghan wasn't nervous. She wasn't searching for an excuse. She wasn't filling the silence with unnecessary words, the way uncomfortable people do. Instead, she walked slowly around the room, looking at framed photographs, old portraits, small pieces of royal history that most visitors barely noticed. But Meghan wasn't looking at them like pieces of decoration. She was studying them, measuring them, as if she were searching for context or confirmation. Have you ever watched someone walk into a space and act like they already knew the room better than they should? That was Meghan. Sarah remained seated, giving nothing away. Because silence is the one tool the royal world always underestimated, and Sarah mastered it. Finally, Meghan turned back toward her. I didn't realize how private this place feels, she said. Almost like a world inside a world. It was a simple comment, but Sarah understood what it really meant. Meghan wasn't talking about comfort. She was talking about opportunity. Royal Lodge wasn't Buckingham Palace. It wasn't filled with constant staff rotation and security checkpoints and endless eyes watching every movement. Royal Lodge was contained, protected, convenient. And now, Meghan had figured that out. Before Sarah could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Slow, steady, familiar. Sarah didn't need to turn to know who it was. Andrew entered the room a moment later and stopped when he saw Meghan. Not shocked, not confused, just aware, as if he already knew she would be there. Which meant one thing. This wasn't coincidence. This was arranged. Sarah watched the exchange silently. Meghan offered a small smile. Andrew returned it. Not warmly, not awkwardly, but with a familiarity that did not match how recently Meghan had joined the family. This was not the smile of two people who barely knew each other. This was the smile of two people continuing a conversation the rest of the world didn't know had started. Sarah's heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. But her instincts, the ones she stopped ignoring years ago, sharpened instantly. Harry will be along later, Meghan said casually, as if explaining away the obvious. But there was no explanation that made sense. Harry arriving later did not explain why Meghan came alone. And it definitely didn't explain why she came early, again. Andrew gestured toward the hallway. They stepped out of the drawing room. Not far. Not in secrecy. Just enough. Enough to be out of earshot. Enough to send a message. This was not a passing greeting. This was a planned exchange. Sarah remained where she was. She didn't move closer. She didn't pretend to be busy. She simply waited. Because waiting always reveals more than reacting. Minutes passed. Not long, but long enough to confirm this wasn't accidental. When Meghan reappeared, her expression hadn't changed. If anything, she looked more certain, more settled. Andrew, on the other hand, looked different. Not visibly shaken. Just lighter. As if someone had just given him something he didn't realize he needed. Meghan thanked him politely, then left through the side entrance, the less visible one. Not the main door. Not the social door. The door people use when they don't want to be seen leaving. Sarah didn't follow her. She waited for Andrew to come back into the drawing room. He did, but slowly, carefully. Did you know she was coming? Sarah asked. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It wasn't emotional. It was neutral. The kind of neutrality that forces the truth to reveal itself. Andrew hesitated, just for a moment, which was all Sarah needed. She just wanted to ask a few questions, he finally said. About what? He didn't say. Why here? He didn't explain. Why alone? He didn't acknowledge. Sarah didn't push. Because pushing makes people defensive. Silence makes people reveal more than they intend. Andrew walked to the window, pretending to look outside. The universal signal of someone hiding thought behind movement. She's trying to understand the family, he added. Another vague justification. Another non-answer. And again, Meghan didn't go to anyone else for that understanding. Not to the Queen. Not to Charles. Not to Catherine. She went to Andrew. Alone. Sarah nodded once, a gesture that showed nothing. But inside her mind, puzzle pieces began rearranging. Not forming a picture yet, but forming a question. Why Andrew? Why now? Why privately? Sarah didn't get her answer that day. But she got something else, something far more unsettling. A shift. From that morning on, Meghan's visits didn't stop. They became a pattern. Not constant. Not obvious. Just consistent enough to indicate intention. Sometimes she arrived before Harry. Sometimes she arrived without him at all. And always, she asked for Andrew first. Staff began noticing in small comments. Oh, the Duchess is here again. She came through the side entrance. She asked if His Royal Highness was in. Nothing gossipy. Nothing dramatic. Just observations. But Sarah collected observations the way other people collect evidence. Because in the royal world, evidence never arrives all at once. It arrives in fragments. And one morning, Sarah got a fragment she didn't expect. She was walking past Andrew's study when she heard voices. Not raised. Not emotional. Just close. Too close. She paused. Not to eavesdrop. To confirm. The voices stopped abruptly. Chairs moved. A door opened. Meghan stepped out. Not startled. Not embarrassed. But composed. As if nothing unusual had occurred. As if private meetings in Andrew's study were completely ordinary. And maybe they were, to them. But not to Sarah. Meghan smiled politely. Sarah returned the gesture without expression. Then Meghan left, again through the side door. Andrew remained inside the study. He didn't come out right away. When he finally did, he looked at Sarah, not with guilt, not with fear, but with something far worse. Defensiveness. The kind that appears before someone is even questioned. Sarah still said nothing. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood something most people never learn. When someone starts defending their actions before they're accused, the truth is already cracking beneath them. After that day, Sarah began paying closer attention. Not obsessively, not emotionally, just consistently, and patterns emerged. Meghan never stayed long, never lingered, never acted recklessly. She was precise, controlled, purposeful. These weren't spontaneous visits. These were strategic meetings. But the question remained. Strategic for whom? For Meghan? For Andrew? For both? Sarah didn't have the answer. Not yet. But she was about to. Because 3 weeks after the first unexpected visit, Royal Lodge hosted another small gathering. Nothing formal, nothing public, just a quiet family afternoon. Meghan and Harry were invited. But Meghan arrived separately. Again. And once inside, she didn't search for Harry. She didn't mingle. She walked directly toward the staircase, the one that didn't lead to the reception rooms, the one that led to Andrew's private corridor. Sarah watched from across the room, her pulse steady but her mind racing with possibilities no one else seemed to consider. But before Meghan reached the stairs, a voice called her name. Not Harry's, not Andrew's, someone else entirely. A person no one expected to be paying attention. A person who should have never known anything at all. Meghan froze, just for a second. But that second changed everything. Because the person who spoke wasn't supposed to be involved. And what they said would turn this quiet pattern into the beginning of something far bigger. Something Sarah wasn't prepared to confront. Something no one was ready for. Something that would make secrecy impossible. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming that no one in the royal family chooses their alliances by accident. Not in public. Not in private. And definitely not inside the walls of a house like Royal Lodge, where silence moves faster than gossip and secrets travel without ever being spoken aloud. But alliances don't form the way most people imagine. They don't begin with agreements. They begin with needs. And in this case, both Meghan and Andrew needed something the other could provide, even if neither of them understood it fully at the beginning. Let's go back to the moment that shifted everything. The gathering at Royal Lodge had continued as peacefully as any royal afternoon could, but the room changed the instant that unexpected voice called Meghan's name. It belonged to Princess Beatrice. Of all people, quiet, observant, unassuming Beatrice. The daughter who rarely inserted herself into anything, the one who learned early that blending into the background was safer than standing at the center. But she wasn't blending that day. Her tone wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was just deliberate, like she wanted Meghan to stop. And Meghan did. Slowly. Composed. No panic. No guilt. Just a fraction of hesitation. The first visible crack in her confidence since everything began. Sarah watched from across the room. Beatrice walked toward Meghan, offering the kind of polite smile that didn't match the look in her eyes. If you've ever seen someone smile while warning someone at the same time, you know exactly what it looked like. Beatrice didn't ask why Meghan was heading upstairs. She didn't need to. Instead, she said something else, something that made the air in the room shift. It's better if you stay down here. People are starting to notice. A simple sentence, but not a casual one. Meghan paused, then changed direction, gracefully, effortlessly, as if she had never planned to go anywhere else. Beatrice didn't follow her. She didn't look at Andrew. She simply returned to her seat and continued her conversation as if nothing unusual had taken place. But Sarah knew better, because Beatrice didn't speak unless she had a reason. And if she had a reason, that meant one terrifying thing. This wasn't just something Sarah had observed. Someone else had seen it too. That realization stayed with Sarah long after the gathering ended. Not because she felt validated, but because she felt uneasy. Because the moment more than one person notices a secret, the clock starts ticking. Secrets don't stay hidden when more than one pair of eyes has seen them. They collapse, slowly at first, then all at once. But before collapse comes the moment that explains everything, the moment when intentions reveal themselves. And that moment arrived sooner than anyone expected. 2 days later, Sarah found Andrew in the sunroom, a space he rarely used unless he was avoiding something. He wasn't reading. He wasn't working. He was thinking, which was worse. Because when Andrew started thinking in silence, trouble always followed. "You've been quiet," Sarah said. Not accusing, not emotional, just observant. Andrew didn't look at her. He kept staring out the window, as if the garden could answer questions he didn't want to ask aloud. "She's misunderstood," he finally said. It was abrupt, disconnected, a response to a conversation that hadn't happened yet. Sarah didn't respond. She let him continue. "She's being watched the way we were. Judged. Assumed. People don't forget your mistakes, even if you've changed." There it was. The first piece of truth. Andrew didn't see Meghan as a newcomer. He saw her as a mirror, a reflection of what he once experienced. The outsider, the intruder, the one the public decided to dislike before knowing. But Meghan wasn't just navigating judgment. She was using it. Sarah realized that in an instant. Because there's a difference between someone trying to survive pressure and someone turning it into leverage. "Is that why she keeps coming here?" Sarah asked gently. Andrew finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes wasn't guilt. It was loyalty, to someone he barely knew. Someone new. Someone who hadn't earned it, at least not in the way royal loyalty used to work. "She feels safer here," he said. But safety wasn't the word Sarah heard. The word she heard was access. Because Royal Lodge wasn't just a home. It was a space without constant scrutiny. No advisors. No staff rotation. No frantic palace guards watching every movement. A place where conversations could happen without ever being recorded or noticed. Sarah didn't accuse him of anything. She didn't warn him. Not yet. Because warnings don't change behavior. They push people deeper into secrecy. Instead, she waited for time to reveal what words never could. And she didn't have to wait long. 1 week later, a media storm hit the royal family, not involving Meghan, not involving Andrew, but pulling attention so far away from Royal Lodge that the timing felt almost convenient. Everyone was distracted. Everyone was reacting. Everyone was focused outward, which is exactly when secrets tend to grow. Harry was out of the country. Public schedules shifted. The palace entered crisis management mode. And suddenly, Meghan had more free space than usual. So when she appeared at Royal Lodge again, Sarah wasn't surprised. What surprised her was who answered the door. Not staff. Not security. Andrew. As if he expected her. As if this wasn't a surprise visit, but a planned one. Sarah watched from a distance as they walked into the study. The room Andrew hadn't used regularly for years. The door closed. Softly. Not slammed. Not rushed. Just intentionally enough to send a message. Privacy was not an accident anymore. Minutes turned into half an hour. Half an hour turned into an hour. And still, no one emerged. Sarah didn't interrupt. But she replayed every detail she had witnessed since the beginning. The early arrivals. The intentional entrances. The closed-door conversations. The shifts in Andrew's behavior. The absence of Harry during every visit. It was no longer a pattern forming. It was a pattern. But what Sarah didn't know, what no one knew yet, was why. Why Meghan kept returning. Why Andrew allowed it. Why both of them behaved as though this connection was something fragile and something necessary. The answer arrived unexpectedly. Not from Meghan. Not from Andrew. But from someone else entirely. The next morning, Sarah was in the garden when Princess Eugenie approached her. Hesitant. Thoughtful. Carrying the kind of expression a person wears when they've debated speaking for days. "Can I ask you something?" Eugenie said quietly. Sarah put down her gardening gloves. Of her 2 daughters, Eugenie was the one who saw more than she ever admitted. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Eugenie glanced back toward the house before answering. "Do you think Meghan trusts father?" It was a strange question. Not dramatic. Not leading. But strange enough to confirm something Sarah hadn't considered. Meghan wasn't just visiting Andrew. She was confiding in him. Sarah chose her response carefully. "What makes you ask that?" Eugenie exhaled slowly. "Because he's different after she leaves. Calmer. Almost like he feels needed again." There it was. The missing piece. Andrew didn't latch onto Meghan. Meghan latched onto Andrew's need to matter. And Sarah suddenly understood the most dangerous type of alliance. Not one based on shared interests, but one based on mutual loneliness. Meghan was isolated by pressure. Andrew was isolated by consequence. Two people on the edge of the same world, both looking for relevance in different ways. That's how unexpected alliances begin. Not with strategy, with vulnerability. And vulnerability is far harder to stop. But this wasn't just emotional. Something else was happening underneath. Sarah realized it the next time Meghan arrived, not at Royal Lodge, but at a small charity event where the family appeared briefly for photographs. Meghan didn't stay near Harry. She didn't stay near Catherine. She positioned herself near Andrew, subtly, naturally, without drawing attention. Their conversation was brief, but not superficial. They spoke the way people speak when continuing something already in motion. Sarah watched from across the room, her expression calm, her pulse steady, but her mind racing through implications that would never be spoken aloud. Because now, their connection was no longer contained inside Royal Lodge. It was visible, controlled enough not to look inappropriate, close enough to suggest familiarity, dangerous enough to create questions if the wrong person saw it. But the most revealing moment wasn't the conversation. It was when Meghan walked away. Andrew watched her leave, not with attraction, not with discomfort, but with something far more telling. Dependence. And that was when Sarah felt the first real chill of fear. Not because of Meghan, not because of Andrew, but because of what alliances like this always lead to inside the royal family. Someone ends up sacrificed. The question was who? Sarah didn't have the answer, yet. But she was about to get one step closer. Because the next time Meghan visited Royal Lodge, something happened that shattered the quiet rhythm of their secret connection. Something neither of them planned. Something no one expected. And it began with a single sentence, spoken by someone who should have never been involved. A sentence that would expose the truth neither Meghan nor Andrew were prepared to face. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Some secrets don't explode. They slip, quietly, slowly, 1 inch at a time, until suddenly, you look back and realize the line you thought you were watching has already been crossed. That's what the second encounter was. Not dramatic, not scandalous, just quiet enough to be dangerous. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind that traps people indoors and forces the house to feel smaller than it really is. Royal Lodge, normally sprawling and open, felt like it was shrinking, pulling the walls closer, leaving less room for coincidence. Sarah didn't know Meghan was coming that day. No one did, not even the staff, which was the first problem. Unexpected visits in the royal world aren't just unusual, they're impossible. Everything is documented. Everything is scheduled. Everything is cleared through someone. So when Meghan appeared without warning, stepping into the entrance hall with an umbrella and the calm expression of someone exactly where she intended to be, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt since the beginning. Real concern. Not suspicion. Not jealousy. Concern. Because spontaneity inside a royal household is never spontaneity. It's planning without permission. Is Andrew in? Meghan asked. Again. As if it were normal. As if she were asking for sugar from a neighbor, not requesting access to a royal resident with no explanation. The staff member hesitated, just long enough to confirm that this wasn't comfortable for anyone. Sarah stepped into the hallway at that moment, her timing unplanned but perfect. Meghan turned toward her, offering a polite smile. It didn't feel warm. It felt practiced. I hope I'm not interrupting, Meghan said. People only say that when they already know they are. Sarah kept her voice steady. Are you here to see Harry? A test. Meghan passed, too quickly. No, he's tied up today. I just needed a brief word with Andrew. A brief word. The same phrase she had used before. Not a visit. Not a conversation. Just a word. As if reducing the language could shrink the meaning. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, a tactic she learned years ago, the kind that forces the other person to reveal more than they meant to. But Meghan didn't fill the silence. She simply waited. And that was the moment Sarah understood something new. Meghan was no longer uncomfortable. She was comfortable. Too comfortable. Almost as if this house, this space, no longer required an invitation. Sarah didn't stop her. Stopping people doesn't prevent secrets. It only changes where they happen. Andrew arrived moments later, descending the stairs with the expression of someone who hadn't been expecting company. Except his reaction didn't match surprise. He didn't freeze. He didn't ask what Meghan was doing there. He simply said, "I didn't realize you'd be able to come today." Which meant one thing. They had planned this. Not necessarily the timing, but the meeting. Sarah said nothing. Words weren't helpful anymore. Actions and patterns were. Meghan and Andrew walked toward the West Wing corridor, the one that led to Andrew's study. They didn't rush. They didn't whisper. They simply removed themselves from the space where other people were. The door closed behind them. Not loudly, just firmly enough to send a message. Privacy wasn't accidental anymore. It was intentional. Sarah remained in the hallway, her breath steady but her pulse uncomfortably aware of itself. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't imagining. She was observing. And what she observed wasn't two people being careless. It was two people being confident. Confidence is far more dangerous. Carelessness gets caught. Confidence hides, because it assumes no one will question it. Minutes passed. 10. Then 15. Rain tapped against the windows, echoing through the quiet halls like a warning no one wanted to hear. Sarah moved through the house, not to spy, but because sitting still would only feed her imagination. An imagination inside the royal world becomes a weapon. She checked the drawing room. Empty. The dining room. Still. The corridor outside the study remained silent. Too silent. But silence alone isn't evidence. Not yet. It wasn't until Sarah walked past the back staircase, the one rarely used, that everything shifted. She heard voices. Muffled. Not loud. Not arguing. Just close. Two voices. Andrew's. And Meghan's. The sound wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't emotional. But it wasn't neutral either. It had weight. Tone reveals truth long before words do. Sarah stopped mid-step, not visible, not listening for details, just confirming proximity. The voices paused. Chairs moved. Something or someone shifted. Sarah stepped back quietly, not to hide, but to avoid triggering the one thing she feared most. Panic. Panic makes people lie, and lies leave no trail. Moments later, the study door opened. Meghan emerged first. Her posture unchanged, her expression calm, but her eyes, just for a fraction of a second, looked different. Not guilty, not frightened, aware. Aware that someone had been nearby. Aware that the house was no longer as private as she assumed. Andrew followed her. His composure wasn't calm. It was controlled. Controlled the way someone looks when they've just been told something they weren't ready to hear, or something they weren't supposed to. Sarah approached slowly, her face neutral, her emotions untouched. "Everything all right?" she asked lightly. A harmless question. Harmless questions are the most revealing. Meghan smiled. But not the way she smiled in the beginning. This smile was tighter, measured. "We were just discussing a few things privately," she said. Privately. Another reduction. Another minimization. Andrew added nothing. Sarah didn't push. She simply stepped aside, allowing Meghan to leave. No confrontation. No accusation. Just a silent acknowledgement. She saw them. They saw her seeing them. And now, everything had changed. After Meghan was gone, the house felt different. Not emptier. Heavier. Andrew remained in the study for the rest of the afternoon. He didn't move through the house the way he normally did. He didn't ask for tea. He didn't speak to staff. He closed the door and stayed inside. That wasn't avoidance. That was processing. And Sarah knew, from years of experience, that when Andrew processed alone, he was one of two things: conflicted or influenced. Neither option was safe. Hours later, at dinner, he spoke only once. A single sentence. Completely unrelated to anything happening at the table. "She's not like everyone thinks she is." He didn't say who. He didn't need to. The room fell quiet, though no one understood why except Sarah. He wasn't defending Meghan. He was aligning with her. Even Meghan probably didn't understand the weight of that sentence. But Sarah did. Because alliances inside the royal family are dangerous for one reason. They don't stay small. They expand. first in whispers, then in decisions, then in consequences. But the true turning point didn't happen that night. It happened the next morning. At breakfast, staff placed the usual newspapers on the table. Andrew ignored them. Sarah didn't. Because one headline caught her eye, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't. A royal story was breaking publicly. Not about Meghan, not about Andrew, but about something that pulled the monarchy into another media distraction. And distractions in the royal world serve a purpose. They hide something else, something happening privately, something someone doesn't want seen. Sarah folded the paper. She didn't show it to Andrew. She didn't mention the coverage, because she realized the most unsettling truth so far. The public was looking in the wrong direction. Everyone was watching the palace gates. No one was watching Royal Lodge. No one except her. But even she didn't know what was coming next. Because later that afternoon, someone arrived at the house. Someone whose presence made Sarah feel the kind of dread that only comes when a story is no longer containable. A person who was never supposed to be involved. A person who knew something no one else did. A person who walked through the door and said a sentence that froze Sarah in place. And what they said wasn't a warning. It was confirmation. Something was happening. Something much bigger than a few private conversations. Something that would pull more people into the truth and push others out violently. And what happened next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Some secrets stay hidden because no one knows they exist. Others stay hidden because the people who know them are too afraid to speak. But the most dangerous kind? The ones that were never meant to be created in the first place. That's what this was. A moment that should have disappeared the second it ended, but didn't. A moment that turned into something physical, permanent, undoable. And everything changed because of a single photograph. Not a picture anyone posed for. Not an official royal image. Not even something taken intentionally. It was an accident. But accidents inside the royal family aren't harmless. They are explosive. It happened on a warm afternoon. The first calm day after weeks of quiet tension. The kind of day that gives people the illusion that everything is fine, even when it isn't. Royal Lodge was hosting a private family gathering. Just a casual lunch outside. No formal seating, no speeches, no photographers, no press. The type of event designed specifically to avoid attention. But attention doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it comes from within. Harry and Meghan arrived together this time. Not early, not separately, together. And for the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to believe that whatever strange pattern had been forming might finally be fading. Maybe the visits were over. Maybe the tension was incidental. Maybe she had read too much into something that never mattered. But hoping something isn't real doesn't make it disappear. It just blinds you long enough for the truth to grow. The afternoon unfolded smoothly. Lunch was served. Conversation flowed. Children ran across the lawn. Everything looked normal. Until one moment, so quick that no one noticed it at first, set the entire future in motion. Meghan stepped away from the table to take a call. Nothing unusual. People do that all the time. Andrew stood up minutes later to speak to a staff member near the terrace. Again, nothing unusual. Except Sarah saw something the others didn't. Meghan and Andrew walked toward the same direction without realizing they were moving toward each other. Or perhaps realizing it exactly. Their paths crossed behind one of the garden hedges, hidden from the main view, but not hidden from everyone. Not hidden from the one person who mattered. Because Princess Eugenie saw it. Not intentionally. Not suspiciously. She just happened to be walking back from the house with her phone in her hand, scrolling through something absent-mindedly, not looking for anything except shade. She lifted her phone slightly to adjust her grip. And the camera shutter clicked. Not loudly, just loud enough. It was the sound every smartphone makes when it takes a photo. But in that moment, it sounded like thunder. Eugenie froze. She hadn't meant to take a picture. She wasn't even looking at the screen. But instinct made her glance down. And what she saw pulled the air straight out of her lungs. The photo wasn't clear enough to be dramatic. But it was clear enough to be dangerous. Meghan and Andrew, standing close. Not touching. Not inappropriate. Just close enough that anyone who didn't know the context could create one. Meghan leaned in slightly, not flirtatiously, not intimately, but intently, the way someone does when saying something they don't want the world to hear. Andrew's posture matched hers. Two people in a private moment. In a family with no room for private moments. Eugenie's pulse began to race. Not because of what the photo showed, but because of what it could suggest. She backed away slowly, making sure no one noticed her expression shift. She didn't delete the photo. She didn't share it. She didn't say anything. She slipped her phone into her pocket and forced her face back into the same neutral composure every royal child learns before they lose their baby teeth. Across the garden, Sarah noticed the change instantly. Because mothers don't need explanations. They just need 1 second. Eugenie avoided eye contact for the rest of the afternoon. She didn't sit near Andrew. She didn't speak to Meghan. She looked through people instead of at them. The silent behavior of someone carrying something heavy enough to shift gravity. Sarah didn't approach her. Not there. Not yet. Because timing reveals truth faster than questioning. And timing came sooner than expected. After the event ended and guests began to leave, Eugenie slipped into the house instead of heading toward the cars. Sarah followed quietly. Not stalking. Not chasing. Just knowing. She found Eugenie in the small sitting room near the back corridor, the one rarely used, the one people go to when they don't want to be found. Eugenie sat with her phone in her hand, staring at the screen as if it were the only thing holding her together. Sarah approached slowly, giving her space to either speak or stay silent. Eugenie didn't look up. She spoke first. Softly. I didn't mean to take it. Not a confession. A fear. Sarah sat beside her. May I see it? She asked gently. Eugenie hesitated. Then turned the screen. Sarah expected something sensational. Something shocking. Something undeniable. But it wasn't that. It was worse. It was subtle. Unclear enough to be misinterpreted. Clear enough to be weaponized. A picture that didn't prove anything, but suggested everything. The most dangerous kind. Eugenie's voice trembled. If someone found this, they would destroy her. And him. And probably all of us. Sarah didn't react. She didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She studied the image the way someone studies an X-ray when they already know the diagnosis, but need to confirm the severity. One moment. One angle. One mistake. And it was enough to ignite a wildfire. Sarah reached out and gently closed Eugenie's hand around the phone. You did nothing wrong, she said. But Eugenie didn't look relieved. Mother, she whispered. They've met alone before. It wasn't a question. It was awareness. Something she had suspected. Something she had tried not to acknowledge. Eugenie wasn't ignorant. She was observant, silently, painfully, the way children of complicated parents learn to be. Sarah exhaled slowly, not in frustration, in resignation, because this was no longer something only she had witnessed. It was now evidence. Tiny, fragile evidence, but enough to shift everything from suspicion into reality. Eugenie looked up finally, her eyes filled with the kind of fear only royals understand. Not fear of the truth. Fear of the consequences. If the wrong person sees this, she said quietly, they will turn it into something it isn't. Sarah nodded. She knew exactly who they meant. Not the public. Not the press. The palace. The institution that doesn't need facts, only opportunities. Sarah stood. Delete it, she said softly. Eugenie swallowed hard, then shook her head. I tried, but I couldn't. Not emotionally. Technically. Her hands had frozen before the button could be tapped. Because deleting something doesn't erase fear. It only erases control. Sarah took the phone gently. Close your eyes, she said. Eugenie did. Sarah deleted the photo with one press. Gone. But not erased. Because images don't disappear when deleted. They disappear when forgotten. This one would never be forgotten. When Eugenie opened her eyes, she whispered, Does father know? Sarah shook her head. And he doesn't need to. But she was wrong. Because secrets like this don't stay contained. They leak through behavior long before they leak through words. That night, Sarah stayed awake long after the house went quiet. Not pacing. Not spiraling. Just thinking. Understanding. Preparing. Because the photo didn't expose Meghan and Andrew. It exposed something else entirely. The situation was no longer a private pattern. It was a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities inside the royal family don't stay small. They get exploited. By the media. By the palace. By people with motives no one sees until it's too late. Sarah wasn't afraid of what Meghan and Andrew were doing. She was afraid of what someone else could do with the perception of it. There's a difference between danger and damage. Danger is what happens quietly. Damage is what happens publicly. And the royal family survives danger. It does not survive damage. The next morning, Sarah planned to speak to Andrew gently. Not confront him, not accuse him, just guide him back into awareness. But she never got the chance, because before she could reach his study, someone else arrived at Royal Lodge. Not Meghan, not Harry, not a member of the family at all. Someone from the palace, unannounced, serious, carrying a sealed envelope. And when Sarah opened it, her heart stopped, because the message inside wasn't a warning. It was a command that confirmed the palace already knew something they should not have known, something that meant the walls had ears. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Secrets inside the royal family don't disappear because they're untrue. They disappear because someone decides they're too dangerous to exist. And this wasn't just a secret anymore. It had become a risk, not because of what Meghan and Andrew were doing, but because of what people could make it look like. That's what the palace fears most. Not scandal, narratives. Because scandals fade, narratives spread. And once a narrative escapes into the world, no one, not even a monarchy, can control what it becomes. The sealed envelope arrived before breakfast, delivered by a palace representative who didn't remove their coat, didn't make conversation, and didn't pretend this was a polite visit. They handed the envelope to Sarah without expression. No explanation, no small talk, just a sentence that felt colder than the morning air. You'll want to read this immediately. Then they left. No driver waiting, no car engine, just silence. Sarah stood in the foyer, the envelope still in her hand, her pulse steady but her breathing slightly tighter. The body's way of recognizing danger before the mind fully does. She didn't open it right away. People who react too quickly make mistakes. People who wait see the truth more clearly. After a moment, she walked into the private sitting room and closed the door behind her. She broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No crest. No signature. No names. Just one instruction. All meetings at Royal Lodge must be scheduled and approved in advance. No unsupervised visits permitted. Effective immediately. There was no mention of Meghan. No mention of Andrew. No accusation. Just an order. Which made it worse. Because the palace doesn't send written orders unless three things are already true. 1. They know something. 2. They don't want to discuss it. 3. They're preparing for containment. Sarah sat down slowly, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she understood what the letter implied. The palace had been alerted. Not by accident. Not through rumor. Through someone. Someone who already knew too much. The walls inside royal residences are old, but the communication lines are modern and invisible. Staff report what they see. Courtiers report what they think. But the most dangerous reports come from people who don't speak at all. People who observe. People who wait. People who choose the perfect moment to say just enough to trigger intervention. Sarah folded the paper and placed it on the table. The message wasn't directed at her. It was directed at Andrew, which meant she had to tell him. But before she could even leave the room, footsteps approached the doorway. Andrew. He didn't knock. He just walked in, the way people do when they assume they're still in control. Something wrong? He asked. His tone was casual. Too casual. Sarah slid the paper across the table. He picked it up, expecting a routine notice. And then his expression changed. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stared at the words as if they were written in a language he hadn't learned. Finally, he looked up. Who sent this? It wasn't a real question.